You mentioned your community before, and since you're a Croatian citizen, I mean, how did the reconciliation process function? Maybe specifically a little bit from the Croatian point of view. So what role did also then external actors have in this process? And also what were the biggest challenges and what were the strategies to overcome those challenges?
Croatia was really heavily impacted by the conflict, as we know, and 1/3 of the country was directly impacted by occupation, by destruction, and then by direct violence. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that were directly affected. And I think just dealing with that legacy was the single greatest challenge. Wars don't just destroy physical property, they destroy communities and they destroy societies. And rebuilding a society around a new sort of consensus is a challenge that we're still tackling. Our politicians often make it sound like our history began in the 90s. We often revolve around this simplification of what Croatia is and what Croatian society is. And I think understanding the civic sort of Republican identity of the country and making sure that everybody, regardless of their faith or no faith, regardless of their ethnicity, origin, and so on, belong equally. I think that needs to go hand in hand. The process of reconciliation needs to go hand in hand with the process of democratization, because I don't think reconciliation is something that can be simply imposed from the leaders. It needs to be something that the entire society feels, that there is no more fear, that there is no more distrust to a level that paralyzes the opportunities for collaboration on the level of the community, but also on the level of the region. And I think in those terms, what contributed to the process of reconciliation in Croatia was the international pressure that mandated and focused on improving regional relations, and particularly relations between Croatia and Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia. But I think there's much more that we need to do on the level of the communities and on the level of our society here in Croatia. And one of those things that we need to do is make sure that we don't go back to nationalist and exclusive interpretations of our history and our reality.
You mentioned how important community is. And now Croatia is the only country from the region, together with Slovenia, not the only country, which is part of the European Union. But when we talk about reconciliation, we normally talk about the 6 Western Balkan states. So how important do you think also this cross-border cooperation, the regional cooperation, in the context of reconciliation?
I don't think reconciliation is possible unless we reconcile with someone. And looking at the region, it would be wrong to think that we live in monolithic societies. We don't. So there's 2 levels of reconciliation that we're engaged in a way. One is the level of our society, and that reconciliation happens on the level of communities and the level of the society nationwide. And the other level is the international, is the reconciliation between our societies and between our countries. Another aspect there is that the war had very strong ethnic aspects, and there is a lot of ethnic interpretation of political leadership still today. And I think that's something that we're also tackling as a challenge as societies, understanding that regardless of my ethnicity, of being a Croat, Serb, or a Bosniak, that I am represented by the Croatian government, that I'm represented by the Croatian president. And in a way that's the same as my fellow citizens of other ethnicities. And I think we need to make sure that our national politics and also politics on the level of communities do recognize and acknowledge this diversity and are inclusive already of different perspectives. And I believe that then takes us closer to reconciling with others, when we do have the ability to also look at these very complex processes, not just from our own narrow ethnic perspective or a perspective of one single community, but when we're able to take a look at our reality from different perspectives and understand how different people of different identities have experienced it.
Thank you so much. You said a little bit about it. It had a very big ethnic dimension, the whole conflict. And if we look now at the history, it is very difficult to actually examine truth, because it seems to be not only one truth. It seems to have a multi-sided dimension of truth. How important do you think truth is actually when it comes to history, when it comes to truth in the process of reconciliation?
Well, I think truth has different purposes and different roles in a society. For example, if we talk about establishing justice after a period of widespread violations, then we can talk to an extent about subjective truths of the perpetrator and the victim. But ultimately, we're talking about facts. And there, I don't think we should have too much tolerance for manipulation with those facts, especially when that manipulation happens or it comes from a nationalist, from an exclusive place. But when it comes to understanding of the wider social processes, there, of course, every community, every family, every individual can have their own perspective and their own truth in a way of how they experienced it. And there, I think we need to show a lot of tolerance and make sure that we're able to talk to those who see things differently from us. I think we often get offended too early when someone shares a perspective different from ours, because we take it as a provocation rather than as an opportunity to learn about this person in front of us. So I think ultimately it's about creating the environment where we can safely and openly and in tolerance speak about our different perspectives and different truths in that regard, as long as we do take the facts, the established facts of what happened as a lighthouse, sort of.
You mentioned that there are, of course, facts, but there is, of course, I mean, you have to be quite open and tolerant when it comes to, as you said, it also this individual truths, but also community truths. Now there is also this mentioning of victimhood is very important also when it comes to the reconciliation process, or when it comes to be talking about what happened in the region anyway. And sometimes you have this sense of there is a competitiveness between this victimhood. So how would you assess the situation? Would you think it's understandable, but it's also kind of dangerous when it comes to reconciliation?
I think it's both normal and dangerous. I think it's normal that my pain hurts me the most, and that your pain hurts you the most. I think that's normal. But I think there's a lot in these nationalist interpretations that hinder the potential of one seeing the suffering of the other. And I think that's where the tolerance and attempt at mutual understanding come into play. Because I think if there's tolerance, if there's committed work on mutual understanding, that having pain and suffering on both sides can actually bring the communities together. Because people who have lost their I'll start the sentence again. The people who have lost their dear ones, who have lost their communities and their homes, can certainly understand others who have gone through through the same on their side. So I think it at the same time represents a potential for understanding and for coming together, but of course can be manipulated and misused if it's coupled with nationalist exclusive interpretations where we don't accept the possibility that the other might have been exposed to pain and suffering as we have.
You talked about nationalism as being one of the biggest challenges also when it comes to moving forward. How important is political leadership in this, and what is actually political leadership?
Well, I think these sorts of situations of transition, reconciliation, these huge political processes do require political leadership, and that means that you don't only try to assess what the majority thinks and then model that, but you try to actually bravely put things on the agenda and say, this is what I believe, this is what I think we need to do. And to tie that to nationalism, I think we need to understand that nationalism is a corrosive ideology, that it's an ideology we should be ashamed of and not promote. And I think that's where both leadership in the region on the national level comes into play, but also international leadership. For example, I find it problematic that many politicians, even from the West, legitimize nationalist politicians and politics in the region. And I think that hinders the potential for reconciliation. I think we should deal with nationalism as a corrosive ideology, understand that it brings no good to anybody, not even to the group that advocates nationalism. And I think our recent history is filled with examples of how we can demonstrate that. So I think it's a process of reckoning that we need to go through each community on its own, because there was and is extreme nationalism in each of our communities. And I think we need to go through a process of reckoning and reconciling with the fact that we were, as collectives, proponents of an ideology that's corrosive to us and to those around us.
How important do you think civil society is in this context, civil society, NGOs in the region? How do you assess what is their value? Do you think it's an additional tool, it's a comprehensive tool together with political leadership, which could actually lead them to a process of reconciliation?
I think there's two key aspects where civil society can contribute and does contribute specifically. One aspect is what I mentioned already, that I don't see a potential for non-democratic society to effectively reconcile with another. I think reconciliation, in order to be a genuine social process, an effective process, needs to be a democratic process. It cannot be imposed by one leader. It cannot be imposed by the elite. It needs to be felt by the communities and by the society. And I think civil society contributes to that a lot. It awakens different voices. It brings different perspectives into sort of a discourse on the national and international stage. And I think that's a very valuable contribution that civil society is making. The other thing is that reconciliation includes a lot of work that's simply unpopular, that's uncomfortable, and that politicians are not going to engage with often initially because it's not politically advantageous. It's actually politically risky and dangerous. So I think civil society, who does not depend on elections, that it has the ability to start these processes, to start talking about things that are seen as very controversial and very unpopular. And I think we can see a lot of examples in the region where civil society started discussions around certain things back when they were seen as highly controversial and impossible, basically. But we got there to a point where now politicians are taking over some of these discussions. For example, when we talk about LGBT persons, when we talk about transparency, even aspects of that refer to reconciliation and building a system of justice after conflict. I think that's where civil society contributes most specifically.
Another very important topic is actually also the relevance of the media and the press when it comes to reconciliation. And we also know that it is very much contested, especially when we talk about Serbia, for example, when we talk about press freedom and media freedom. But media yet should actually be the watchdog of the state. So how do you assess the importance and the relevance of media in the region for the process of reconciliation?
I think there's no open debate without free media in a society. I don't think a society can have an open, constructive debate unless it has free, independent media that can both report facts about what's happening, but also instigate public debates around important issues. So I think that any pressure on the media freedoms, any pressure on journalists doing their work professionally is basically treasonous work. It goes against the national interest. It goes against the interests of a society. It hinders the development of democracy. And yes, it helps us sort of box us in with certain interpretations instead of challenging the ones that we need to challenge to move forward. So I think free and independent media are instrumental to both democratization and reconciliation.
Thank you very much, Mario. How important do you also assess other external actors? I mean, in the European Union, I'm pretty sure you're aware of this. We talk a lot about the influence the European Union has and about the value system, which many even forget in the European Union, that the European Union is actually founded upon these common values. I think this is a very important point. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, we see Russia is going more into the region, China is going more into the region, the Emirates are going more into the region, and a geopolitical European Union sees this with concern. What do you think the European Union could do in this context?
I do believe that the European Union is in crisis, and I'm deeply disappointed as a European citizen. I think European Union has been consistently in the recent years underperforming when it comes to standing up and defending our democratic values and values of a tolerant society. Obviously, there's internal issues in the EU, but we also saw other established democracies such as the US go through political processes or periods of political leadership that definitely were not setting a positive example from the perspective of democracy and of tolerance. And I think that impacts the situation in small states like ours. And as you mentioned, there's other global despotic forces that do still fight against the idea of an open democratic society. And I think the European Union and the US should definitely be much more firm when it comes to advocating and defending these values.
We have recently been hearing about a so-called non-paper of a non-author, probably from Slovenia, but this is not the first time that these ideas have been discussed. We also remember, I think 2 or 3 years ago, when there was this idea of changing borders between Kosovo and Serbia. How do you think do these tendencies reflect when it comes actually to the reconciliation process?
I think they reflect very badly because they promote the idea that a society cannot be stable unless it's ethnically homogeneous. And I think that goes against the liberal democratic understanding of states that we have in the 21st century. I think those kinds of proposals are detrimental to progress of building diverse and tolerant societies. And I do believe that the diversity can even strengthen the society and not weaken it. So promoting the attitudes that a situation is unstable or a society is weak if it's diverse, I think that's appalling.
Thank you so much. My last question would be, what would be your wish for the region for the next 10 years to become true?
Well, my wish for the region 10 years from now would be that young people grow up in an environment where they feel and believe that they have the opportunities to realize their potential here. I think where the nationalism and corruption and low level of democratic development and bad education systems and issues between the countries and societies that hinder our collaboration, are creating a society for young people or societies for young people where they tend to think that in order to make something of themselves, they have to leave. They have to go somewhere else. I think that's the worst thing that we can have happen to the region, and that's why I hope that we are going to turn our backs on nationalism, on corrupt and non-democratic political practices, that we're going to be supported by our allies and friends around the world to build our stronger democratic institutions and to make sure that this is a peaceful region, interconnected, where everybody, but most importantly, young people do have the kinds of opportunities that today they're only looking for outside of the region.